The Illustrator is one of the most, if not the most important selections you will make. I always say the artwork is probably 50% of a picture book, but the impact is more than that. So today the topic is how to find and work with an illustrator to bring your vision to life. I have a little bit of a cold, so you have to bear with me. For those of you that don't know me, my name is April Cox. I am an author. I'm also the founder and CEO of Little Labradoodle Publishing. I've been working with authors and publishing my own books since 2017. And so we work together and create amazing books. We will see some of them today. I'm going to be going through a lot of information. And sometimes this kind of information can feel like drinking from a fire hose. I probably use that phrase way too often, but when, you've got a lot of information coming at you and, for me, I picture somebody's hair blowing back and it's like, I can't possibly absorb it all. Don't worry. You will be able to replay this. I will also share the slides with you and share some of the tools that I'm going through. So finding and working with an illustrator to bring your vision to life. Very important. One of the most important things that you will do that will make or break your experience of creating your picture book. Not only that, but it is also going to be a very important part of your experience and how other people experience your picture book. We're going to talk a little bit about tips for selecting your illustrator. And I have some tricks for you. Single best way to take months off the illustration process. Huge opportunity there. And some best practices to avoid delays and stay on track when you're working with your illustrator. The Illustrator is one of the most, if not the most important selections you will make. I put it up there with your editor who's going to help make your words perfect, right? I always say the artwork is probably 50% of a picture book, but the impact is more than that, right? So you can have an okay story with amazing illustrations, and that book will do really well. You can have a fabulous story with so-so illustrations, and it's just not going to fly. It's a very, very important part of the picture book that you put together. So first, I'm going to start with where can you find an illustrator? So most of these things at the beginning are things that I used to share also with my author work group when we first got started. You can ask other authors. There are tons of author groups out there, children's book author Facebook groups and communities that you can connect with and ask people for referrals for illustrators that they've worked with, that they've really appreciated and like. You can also go to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI. If you're a children's book writer, it's a great society to be a part of, but they also have chapters all around the US and probably outside the US as well, I'm sure. And they also allow some of their illustrators to post portfolios and things like that. So you can get a sense for your local area illustrators, what their work looks like. And again, that community is pretty close-knit. They have chapter meetings and things like that. It's a great place to reach out, make connections with both writers and illustrators. There are opportunities also to connect with freelancing sites and I put a caution there, right? Because there's Fiverr, there's freelancer.com. And while there are some diamonds in the rough in some of these places, there are some amazing illustrators. It's a little bit harder to vet them. There are some of these sites do have feedback and you can see, this person has done 40 projects, has a 5-star rating. Some of their previous artwork is out there, so you can kind of get a sense. I will say, when I say caution, it's because myself, as well as other authors I've worked with, have been burned because it's very easy for those illustrators to grab artwork from other portfolios and pass it off as their own. You really do have to have a little bit more caution when you're working through freelancer sites. Just be careful. And then the last one, I created a list. When I say SPMS, that means Self-Publishing Made Simple. And that's my program that we've put together. And over the course of time, I have created a list of amazing illustrators that my authors have worked with, that I personally have worked with, that have provided some really great service and work that you can trust. They are familiar with my program. They understand that it is a 12-week process for those that are going through my work group here with me in January. And so they know that they need to stick with a timeline. They know the contract that I provide to you guys, and they're willing to accept that. They know that I require them to accept a $50 sample fee to put a full color sample together for the authors. And so they've been working with me for a while. They understand. And they also know that if something goes awry, I'm going to be on the phone or on a Zoom call with them, because I expect a level of service that is going to not derail what's happening with my author group. So there's that goes along with it. And this is, an example of how things have kind of migrated over time as I've worked with people and found out where they got stuck. For my Self-Publishing Made Simple program, we put together resources that can help you get through it. So those are some of the places that you will find illustrators. And by the way, because you're participating in this session or you're participating in my author work group, I'm going to share with you that list of illustrators. So what do you look for when you are trying to find an illustrator? First of all, do they work in a style that you're attracted to? Go take a look at their portfolio. Are they willing to accept a work for hire contract? This is a question that you should be asking them. I recommend that you do, work in a situation where work for hire means you're going to pay the artist a fee that is not a lowball fee, but a fair price for their artwork. In return, they are going to give you ownership, not just a license, but the ownership of the artwork. So you are contracting with them to create artwork that you will own. That is what the crux of a work for hire contract is. And that is what I recommend that you do. Some illustrators won't do that. They prefer to work and they'll say, well, don't worry, I'll license you the images. But if you don't own them and you want to use them for other purposes besides your children's book, maybe you want to do T-shirts or other things, or maybe somebody comes to you and says, I want to create a show on Nickelodeon for those characters. They're not your characters. So you can't negotiate that. You have to go to the illustrator. You've got to bring that person in. And what if that illustrator says no? Or what if they're, playing hardball? You can lose opportunities. So I don't like to worry about that. And you guys will probably get to know me a little bit and realize, when I say I'm a control freak, I'm a control freak. This is one of the places I want control over the artwork. I want the ownership of that artwork. They're my characters in my mind. The illustrator is going to bring them to life. And I love them for that. But they're not going to own my characters, my dog, my family, characters of my grandkids, right? Those are mine. So that's why I say, are they willing to accept a work for hire contract? Ask that question before you fall in love with their artwork, because by then a lot of people just say, oh, I'll just deal with it. What's the odds that something will happen? And unfortunately, when it does happen, it's usually a pretty massive issue. What level of experience does this person have? What kind of skill set do they have? And you can usually tell based on the artwork. And if you're asking people for references, you can get a sense of what they're thinking, how it was to work with that person. But you can also tell by just asking them, how long have you been doing this? And get that dialogue going. It's important for you to know what you're getting into. And then evaluate them based on their performance on a sample that you requested. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward a little bit. Communication skills. There are some amazing illustrators all over the world. Many of the best illustrators I've ever worked with are outside of this country, the US. And sometimes communication can be a problem. And as long as you know what you're getting into and you understand, yes, I can see it's a little bit of a communication. Things get lost in translation, but I'm okay with working through that. At least know where you stand. And the only way that you're going to learn that is by engaging upfront before you hire that individual and you contract with that individual. And then location and time zone. If you have restrictions, you really want somebody in the US or you really want somebody from a particular area of the country. And also your budget considerations, spend a little time ahead, really thinking through what you can afford, what your budget is. And we're going to talk more about that as we move forward. So the request, if you are in a Facebook group or you're chatting with someone on Instagram or whatever, these are the kinds of things I'm just giving you a heads up of the kinds of things I ask for. I'm looking for an illustrator who's willing to work on a work for hire contract and is skilled in the art style shown. And usually I attach a few different samples. That, first of all, reduces the people that don't want to work for hire. They're not going to respond. The people that, when they see the style, if they're not familiar with that art style, they know you don't want anybody that can't, produce that kind of style. If you're interested, contact me with a link to your portfolio and a budget range for the selected illustration style. It could be a price per page, $35 to $85, depending on the level of complexity, the number of characters in the book. So you might need to give them a little bit. They might have more questions about the style or the number of characters and things like that. And then I always say something like, I usually pay $50 for a full color sample. And if good fit, then we can move forward. Does that work for you? So this is kind of a way of giving you to get engaged with the illustrator. So the illustration process, start with a sample. There's the character design. And you can see across the top here, a character design, where they've taken my dog, put him in a bunch of different positions and kind of give me a sense of how they would interpret that character. There is storyboarding that happens. Take a look at this storyboard right here. It's a very rough sketch of these puppies running towards me. I can see what he's going for. I can see the composition of what I can expect. And onto the right side, you see that finished photo. Now, I think this was a very easy way, very quick and dirty, just drawing sketch of what he wanted to compose. With a storyboard, you get to go through every part of your story, beginning to end. It's not just this one picture. It's a beginning to end storyboard of how the author wants to kind of compose and how they see the book based on their creativity, the inputs you've given them. And then over time, that's going to go from the storyboarding, cover design gets in there. It can be here, it can be other places. You work on your storyboards together. Then they go through a more detailed sketching. And then it moves over to color. And we'll talk more about the details, and I'll show you some examples of this as we move up together. And finally, the delivery of the files at the end. And I require in my contract that I put together, and I will share with you guys that are in my work group, it's a contract that says at the end, they're going to deliver you the source files. So you'll get the actual Photoshop files with, the multiple layers and things so that you can use those to create other marketing material, or eventually someday if you need to have a tweak done and maybe, the illustrator's no longer around, or, somebody else can get in and manage some tweaks for you so that you can continue to move forward. So the first thing I recommend is the best $150 that you are going to spend on your project, on your book project, and is requesting Illustrator samples. I recommend that you choose 3 illustrators and you pay $50 to each of them to create a sample. Give them the same exact directions so you can see how the 3 people interpret your scene or your sample differently, because they will. You'll select a character. You will have 3 illustrators, so $150. And then when you get the sample, provide feedback. Even if you love it exactly the way that it is, come up with some tweak. Can you turn the head slightly? Can you move, just change the position of the dog a little or whatever? Why do I do this? Because number one, if one of these illustrators has taken something off of the web and is passing it off as their own artwork, which happened to me with my little Labradoodle, actually, when you try to ask them to go and change it and move it or do something a little different with it, all of a sudden they can't do it. Or it's immediately obvious that that's not their work, right? So ask for a tweak. The other benefit of doing that is you also get to see how well they communicate and how well they apply or understand your directions and how quickly they reply to it. How well is their communication and how does it feel working with that individual? Make a note of those communication skills and the ability for them to take direction and make your updates in a timely fashion. And then meet one-on-one with your preferred illustrator. So if out of the 3, one clearly is, you're leaning towards, before you sign any kind of contract, make sure they're willing to meet on Zoom and chat with you. Because if they're not, that's going to make that project really difficult to get through when you are struggling with something and you just need a face-to-face. So some artists will say, no, I don't do that. I do everything by email. Some will only communicate through Messenger. Again, I'm a control freak. I expect somebody I'm working with to be able to get on the other end of a Zoom call and walk through things with me. And if they're not willing to do that, then I cross them off my list. So these are some of the ways that I have worked to select and to build my own network of illustrators, but also have helped authors do the same. Make your selection, but don't forget the contract. Don't move forward with an illustrator without a contract or agreement. Take advantage of the $12,000 I spent to create these templates and tools. And I did it out of necessity because my first project went south really fast because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I allowed the illustrator who was in the business for over 30 years, he just sent me his contract. I signed a contract that was not good for me at all. We went through some real struggles there. So I went back to an attorney. He had to, unwind that contract and create a new one. And in the course of going through all this, I said, never again am I going to do this. I want to create my own contract that's going to give me everything I need. And so it was a lot of money spent on my end. And I've taken all of those lessons learned and put it into the contract that I share with you guys. So use that contract template. It's here for you. And you don't have to make that same mistake that I did or have things come back to bite you in the rear end later. Okay. So do use that, move forward with that. So a sample brief is the first thing. Remember we said number one, create a sample. So Mela is one of the authors I've been working with. And I thought this would be maybe a good example to use for you guys. So we put together a sample brief, meaning like just a description of what you want the sample to be. We provided a sample request here. It says the main character is a monkey named Macaque, which, it's an African language, a monkey in the Caribbean. The story is based on an African folk tale. There are human characters in the book. And here's an art style that she really liked. So we included that along with some other imagery that we gave them the link to where they could check out some other sample artwork and things like that. And she also had the type of monkey that this character is a macaque monkey. So we put a sample of what the monkey would look like. And she had an earlier image from another illustrator that had done things early on. And when I met with her, I said, you know what? I think we could probably bring up the level of illustrations for this book. Maybe we should try to get some samples and see what we can come up with. So you can see this document, this sample request, just kind of gives an overview. Some of the things you'll want to put in that is the character, like the scene, the character, whatever it is that is really important to you. So what is really important for you that in order to really select your illustrator, they need to nail this? right? For me, it was my dog. Labradoodles are hard to draw, and I wanted to make sure they could get the emotion of the character. So in my brief, I said things like, my dog is the runt of the litter. He's very shy, very unsure of himself. He's a Labradoodle. Here's some pictures of him from different angles. So I want you to put him out in the backyard. It's a New England home. And I just want him sitting, just put him in a seated position. So I gave him a lot of information. If you want to have some sort of emotion come through in the sample, and you want to make sure that they can provide some kind of emotion into the image, make sure you say, this little monkey is feeling really lonely. It's having some problems. And this is what's going on leading up to this sample that I'm giving you. Now, you notice we gave him a little bit of an overview here. We're not sharing the manuscript. We're not giving them all of the information about the story. That's your story. And you don't want to be sharing that kind of stuff until you have signed a contract and everything is a go. But you want to give them enough information so that they can clearly provide you with a really good sample request. So this is kind of the type of thing that we provided. Again, here's the image at the top that we started with as a sample. We first got this back. They kind of put this line art together. So they took this monkey kind of up a level of detail. And then we had some feedback about the style of the monkey. The ears should be bigger, change a little bit of the monkey. And we also wanted to see, how the art came together for this special kind of tree that the monkey is in. So they still had questions because we were still going back and forth with the monkey. So they colored all this and sent it back to us. We took a look at it, and we're still having some issues with the monkey design. So they updated that. And then this is the final that we just received. I would still recommend that she reaches out to 2 other illustrators, but you can see the level of illustration that we started with here. It's an okay illustration style, but when you kind of take a look at this to this, you can see it's much more commercial. And that's what I was trying to provide for Mela, is some other alternatives and options to think about. The single best way to take months off the illustration process. So besides the sample, all right, let's talk about this. Many of you are currently working with an editor, and that editor is getting your words in order. While that's happening, it's perfectly fine to go out and start interviewing and getting samples from illustrators. What you don't want to do is start jumping into actually moving forward with illustrations until your edit is completely final. But what happens now, let's just say you've gone through the sample process. You know which one you want to work with. Your editor has finalized your words. So now the next step is take your words, and in the story, so let's see here, Carol sleighs in candlelight, Santa dressed in red and white. This is from one of the stories that we've published already. It's called Sweet Dreams of Christmas by Sue Elias. So you see here in the illustration brief, we've got the words. We've got them put into page numbers. So this is called pagination, right? And if you're working with Bobby Hinman, she will help you paginate your story, kind of take the words and spread them out so that they're, go across 32 pages or 36, or come up with that nice flow of how your words will and page turns will be. You can also do that yourself, or you can ask your editor working with that. So as a result of working through that, now you've got, what the words are going to go on each page. So add some notes and talk to the illustrator and tell them what's important. So here, her notes for page 8 and 9 spread is, on the right page, some kids are singing carols and musical notes. Above them with the words, jingle bells, jingle all the way. And then she put a sample image, which I didn't put here, but it was a clip art of 3 kids singing. They're holding books, they're holding candles. And on the left side, she wanted a house all decorated for Christmas with Mrs. Santa and Mrs. Claus, like in front of the house, like decorative Santa and Mrs. Claus. So she had something in her mind that she wanted, and she put that on the page. Now, there are some people that say, you know what, I would much rather just have the illustrator decide what they want to do. And if you truly want to give more control, that's fine. If you have specific things that you see in your mind that you want to put out there, one of the things that I typically do is I put some notes, like this is what I'm thinking. And then when I actually complete the illustration brief, I've already selected the illustrator, the contract is signed. I will put together a Zoom meeting and we will go through it together. And we'll go through my notes, the different things on each page, and I will have that back and forth. This is what I see. What do you think? You have other ideas? And they might say, you know what? I've got something in mind I want to show you on this. So I think it works really well when there's that back and forth, give and take. And I will say that there are sometimes I go through an illustration brief and I come up to a page and I think, I have no idea how the illustrator is going to accomplish this. I have nothing in my mind. And I just say, whatever you think, feel free to use your discretion to illustrate what this page is asking for. And I will tell you that those are some of my favorite pages in my books. They're the ones that I had no clue about and I didn't provide too much guidance on. I just said, do whatever you think. So that's probably no coincidence, right? That I gave this artist an opportunity to include and to use their own imagination to get things done. So I just urge you to be willing to have some give and take, give the illustrator an opportunity to be creative. But if you say, go ahead, have at it, and then you kind of see what they give you and you don't like it, or gee, that's not at all what I had in my mind, it could end up with a lot of back and forth, a lot more stress, a lot more angst, a lot more time that the illustrator needs to spend to get this correct. And maybe even, impact your relationship if there's lots of back and forth and they're expecting one level of effort and that doubles or triples, right? So it can create a rift between an author and illustrator when that kind of thing happens. So I like to try to walk that fine line. Imagery can also be helpful. So we had the words here in this sample. This author has put it on a page and here's the words that are coming on the page. And they put some direction and an example of what they're thinking. Like here is a line of lockers. The illustrator, she asked that this child be standing at her locker and a bully is confronting her. So she also wanted to communicate like the hairstyle and the fact that this individual, this character is Latino. Now, it doesn't mean that this is exactly what we want them to create, but it gives them a sense of what we're thinking. Because in this case, the illustrator was from India. Now, do their lockers at school look like this? Probably not, right? It's a different culture. So by giving them a little bit of a visual, we help them to imagine. Some things can happen. I've seen some examples where in the illustration brief said the setting was a farmer's market, but didn't provide any imagery of it. An Indian farmer's market looks very different than our farmer's market, right? So giving them some kind of a setting and like, this is what that would look like can be really helpful. I also had one illustrator I worked with and I kept saying, why is it that this guy is not getting my squirrel? It looked like a rat. It looked like all kinds of other things. Well, they didn't have squirrels in Indonesia. He had never seen a gray squirrel like we have it here in New England everywhere. So I didn't put a picture of the squirrel. And if you Google squirrel, there's all kinds of different squirrels, right? So he didn't know what I was talking about or what I wanted. And we're just going back and forth before I realized it's a cultural thing. I didn't do a good job showing him what I needed. So just think about that. The more you can do with your words, your notes, giving them some guidance, the more quickly that they can meet your needs. Okay. And then here is an example that I also provide in the work group where an individual went through and put, page numbers, the words on the page, the guidance note to the illustrator, and then some sample images. And I thought it was brilliant. So I said, I'm just going to screenshot this. Not that you have to. You don't have to use this. If you like PowerPoint, use PowerPoint. If you like some online bookmaking software, use that. Just whatever you want to use is perfectly fine. But I thought this was a really good way of showing what it is that we're trying to communicate to our illustrator. So here it says, let's all go to church. Thank our Lord up above. No, no, I say, staying in bed is what I love. So that's the words on the page. And so you see, mom is poking her head in, and the little boy in the clip art has the blankets over him. So this really communicates something special, doesn't it? It kind of shows the illustrator what it is that she is seeing in her head and what she wants to create. She had a sample of his toy that she wanted in the book, a sample of the church where she got married that she would like them to utilize. So when you see these kinds of examples, what are you learning and what is that bringing to your mind? Is that helping you get to the point where you could start really preparing to do a good job working with your illustrator? So the next tip that I have is work within your budget. I'm showing you some samples of some artwork, $50 to $70 a page. Simple, right? Let's look at this. Simple, not a lot of background detail, a limited number of characters. Certain styles are much easier to work in than others. If you get to, 75 to 90 a page, it's more complex artwork, more shading, more characters sometimes. And then as you kind of move towards $100 or more, you start to get this kind of 3D effect. You start to see that whole otherworldliness that starts coming out. Let's just say I fall in love with this image and I just love it, but it is way above what I budget for my project. That doesn't mean you cannot talk with that illustrator and say, can we do this kind of style, but what can we do to it so that it can be more of like a $70 to $80 a page? Would you do less details in the background? What could we do? Maybe less depth to all the shading and things so that it's not quite three-dimensional. So you can kind of talk with an illustrator and devise how best you can take the art you love and help make it fit more into your budget. Now you decide, you've gone through, you've found your illustrator, you've put together your illustration brief, you're ready to go. And I said, don't move forward without a contract. So I do have my contract template. I'm happy to share with you. It has the fact that you own the copyright. There's no royalties that you have to pay. You get the source files. And, if you're not going to use mine, at least make sure you have the appropriate rights and consult with a legal professional so that you're sure that there's not going to be an issue with the contract. So if you have questions, make sure you reach out. And if you would like me to check out a contract, I'm not a legal professional, but there are some things that I've been burned on that I would look for and give you some advice. But my primary advice is, please, if you have questions, talk to a legal professional. Okay. So now I'm going to just talk about best practices to avoid delays. Make sure you are clearly communicating character traits and important information that you want your illustrator to know. Agree on milestones and timelines. So once you've signed the contract and they have a sense, they've done your sample, they've walked through your illustration brief, now they should have an idea of how long it's going to take them to put together your storyboard. Once you finalize your storyboard with them, they should have a better understanding of how long it will take them to turn that into detailed sketches and into color art. So make sure that you're having those discussions and that we're holding them accountable and reminding, okay, so this is going to be done by such and such, right? And we're just keeping them aligned that everybody's moving towards a specific date. And this is a project management thing that, 35 years in IT, about 15 of them have been in project management with multi-million-dollar projects. And one of the best advice that I can provide is whatever is measured improves. If you draw a line in the sand with a date and you put dates there, you have that measuring stick. How are we doing towards our dates? Do we think we're still going to make that? In order to meet this 12-week deadline for the course to be published, we need to have these dates. And when you are bringing those to the attention of the person that you're working with, now they've got a goal. It's very easy otherwise for people to just lose track of things. It's not that they mean to miss out on dates, but so make it something that you always revisit and check on regularly. And also remember that we as authors, can really derail those dates. If the illustrator gives you some illustrations to review and provide feedback, and it takes you a week to get it back to them, then some of those delays are on us. If we didn't do a good job in the illustration brief, or we left things, kind of willy-nilly, and what they interpreted out of it didn't quite meet our needs, so we went back and forth and back and forth, all of that adds to the timeline too. So the better we can communicate, the better upfront we can help them. We'll make sure that the delivery of our work can be done within that period of time for us to be launching in 12 weeks with our new book. Okay. If time is a critical thing, or you've got some issues, then you can look at incorporating incentives or penalties. I like the carrot instead of the stick, and say, if you meet this deadline, I'm willing to give you, a $200 bonus or $500 bonus. If you deliver after that time, I'll pay this much, which is something different. So incentives can also help if you're working on a really tight timeline. I would probably be doing things like that if I were trying to deliver a project in plenty of time for Christmas, because if it goes over, then you can lose out on a lot of Christmas sales. So I would incorporate some sort of incentive, and maybe even a penalty. If it's delivered late, it's a penalty of this much per day after it's supposed to be delivered. And then at that point, you just need to make sure also that you aren't causing those delays, which could be penalizing the illustrator. Make changes early prior to coloring. So we're going to talk about some of the example steps that happen. If you find something in the storyboarding process you want tweaked, very, very simple, easy to change. If you wait until you've got your color illustration and you all of a sudden, your friend or your somebody says, I think maybe that here should be different. If you're that far, now you've got to go back to the beginning with a specific thing or character or something. Very time-consuming process for an illustrator. It also can be very stressful if you're trying to get something finished, right? So just be cognizant of the fact that early changes, very good. Get them nailed down. Late in the game, after you've kind of gone ahead and approved them to move forward with coloring, I would do everything you can to avoid major changes at that point of the process. Or if you do request them, then be willing to compensate the illustrator for doing it for you. Okay. And respect the artist process. I've worked with some artists that tell me, I prefer that you just hold off on your feedback until I finish the first pass at all of these images. I'm going to send them to you as I get them done, but don't tell me anything because I want to get through my process first. That's great. Some want you to provide some feedback and along the way, and then they'll finalize things a few images at a time. Just ask, what's your process? What works best for you? And then try to respect that process. One illustrator contacted me one time and said, can you help me with your author? I'm meeting my deadlines and I'm doing what I should be doing, but I'm getting emails almost every day. I'm getting messages in my messenger, all kinds of questions, all kinds of tweaks, all kinds of changes, and I'm just not able to focus on my work. So just remember, you can over communicate and be respectful with your communication because it can derail them. And you want this experience to be just as good working with you as it is for you to work with them. And you want to build a partnership that you can hopefully do a lot more than one book together. So we want to make sure we're being respectful. Limit the number of rounds of revisions and don't take things personally. In that situation I just mentioned, going back and saying to the author, we need to let this person do their work. What you're doing is sidetracking them and making it really hard for them to focus on the deliverable ahead. Let's kind of gather your feedback and review it. It would be very easy for that author to take it personally, like, oh, this is bad, and start getting a rift between the author and the illustrator. And I also tell the illustrators, don't take it personally. If you deliver something that didn't quite hit the mark, it might be absolutely beautiful artwork, but the author had something a little bit different in mind. It's no detriment, no negative thing for you. It's just something we need to work through to get the final product to be where the author needs and wants to have it. So it's a lot of that. We just need to make sure from an interpersonal perspective that we also, don't put up our guard or cause issues because we are taking things personal. This is all business, and it's about getting things done. And it's about, a mutually satisfying relationship that you're building. So I'm just going to kind of show you some of the close-ups samples of some of the things we've talked about. Character design, it can be your character with different kinds of clothes that you want. It shows the colors, shows the character with different moods that are going throughout the book. I think that my illustrator did a great job of getting my little Labradoodle, Brady, documented pretty well. Now, this is a sample of parts of my storyboard from my first Illustrator. And you can see that, like I said, they're very rough. He shows where the text is going to be placed. So he left room for the text placement. We've got some rough sketches of what it might look like. And you can see, look over here. These are just a few pencil sketches. And in some cases, you might even get stick figures back, right? That show you something that's happening on the page, what the action looks like, but they're not really detailed. So this is very similar, but it does a great job communicating what the artist's vision is for your story. And then as you move forward with more of the sketches, they'll take the more simplified artwork and provide more detail around it and start filling it in so that it's more detailed. When you go through and approve the sketches, then they will move to a more colored illustrations. This is a different book that we've worked on with one of my authors. And you can see it's such a difference when you go from sketch to color. Like, you can't imagine when they start filling color in and you start getting those images from your illustrator. It's like Christmas every day. You're opening, oh my God, look at this and look at that. And it ends up being so much fun. This is the most fun part of things. And yes, you may go back and say, I think this guy over here, he was supposed to have darker skin and darker hair. Like those kind of things, they can go in and tweak, right? But hey, can we take this person out? And, I'd like to get my niece into the picture. Here's a picture of the niece. Can you go draw her in now? No. That's going to cause a lot of delays. It's going to require some extra payment to get it done. And, it happens. These kind of things happen, but try to avoid that. If you want to stick on your 12-week period to go from your manuscript being done to published book in 12 weeks, then you want to try to avoid those kind of things. I also want to talk a little bit about cover design because this is something you're going to do with your illustrator. First of all, I want to say that the cover image is created by your illustrator. So you want to visualize and you want to go back and forth and kind of get something that looks good. They're not going to do this part of it. This is the title, designing a cute badge, putting it all in the structure of a cover. The role for that is done by the design and formatter. Yes, there are some illustrators out there who are good at pulling something like this together. They're very few and far between. I would much rather have the illustrator focusing on the illustrations and the designer take your, beautiful illustration and turn it into a cover. The other part of this, when we're talking about cover design, you want to make sure that the image is going to really pop, that when people are scrolling and it's a little thumbnail size, that it's going to pop off the page and make them pay attention to it, right? That means the top third of your cover is usually going to be given to the title. If you've got a series, you might want to have a little series badge or something like that. Some people will leave room for awards and things that will come later, and some room for the author illustrator information. So I'll give you a little sense of something else that I always recommend when you're designing your cover. For this one, A Barrel Racer's Dream, we went online to Amazon and we pulled down the competitors in the horse category. So we put their covers in little thumbnails all around the one that we chose that we liked the best. There were 3 cover options we put together for this book. This is one that we liked the best. This one was another, Rocking Horse Rodeo. It was another title she was playing with. And this is another one here. So of the 3 covers, we put those here, and then we surrounded it by others in, the best sellers in that category, in that niche. And you can really see how the design of this cover pops and how it compares, what it's going to look like in the midst of the competitors in that niche. So this is a great thing. I call it the cover test, right? Put it in the middle, surround it by others. And if your cover gets really lost or it doesn't really stand out, then keep working on it. That's what your designer's there to help with. That's a little something, it's kind of illustration, kind of design, but just a little tip that kind of goes along with what we've been talking about. For those of you who are here because you're planning and you're moving forward for the January class, is to work with your editor to get your editing finalized. And when you have your edit, your words are final, then start working on your illustration brief. In the meantime, while your edit is taking place, go ahead and move forward and request those 3 samples. I will be sending you a replay of this meeting. I'll be sharing my slides and also my list of approved resources that you can tap into for your illustrators. So take the time to vet them and go through the process of getting those samples and then preparing. And by the time we're starting in January, you are going to be in a great shape to move forward. Okay? Have a wonderful evening, everybody.